which stands for performances, lectures, and screenings in media arts. I have the privilege of co-teaching and co-curating this year's Plasma, which is about to end, with my colleague, Professor Margaret Tree, as well as Professor Paige Sarlin. And Plasma, for those of you who don't know, was co-founded by Professors Terry Reed, Paige Sarlin, and the late Tony Conrad. Today we are very excited to introduce you to an acclaimed filmmaker. I will not be introducing her or saying much about her. I'm going to be introducing the person who introduced us to each other and who suggested that we connect with her. And so basically we have two esteemed guests, and I'm going to be introducing one of them, followed by you meeting Professor Lynne Sachs, who is visiting UB for the first time in a while now. So let me talk to you about the person who is going to take the mic shortly, Professor Dorothea Bramer. Dorothy has been making films, videos, and media installations for the past 25 years. In the tradition of Maya Deren's amateur filmmaker, she's committed to media as a personal and intimate language through which she explores the world around her. Her topics range from agriculture to art to autobiographical essays. An activist at heart, she still has not given up hope about changing the world through media. Lately, she's been occupied with dollhouse installations, either trash-picked dollhouses or dollhouses she built herself, with media projection to address topics exploring vulnerabilities and weaknesses in her own view, in her own worldview, inviting dialogue. Random House Guest Generator was her latest interactive dollhouse installation. And what basically, it's randomly inviting or rejecting people to a dinner party at her house. She's also a longtime member of the media collective Termite TV. Her work has been screened at museums and film festivals across the United States, including the Museum of Modern Art and Anthology Film Archive in New York, and has also been exhibited in Switzerland, Germany, Hungary, Malaysia, England, India, and Canada. She's received awards from the Black Maria Film Festival, the Athens, Ohio Film Festival, the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts, New York State Council on the Arts, Fulbright, and others. She is also an arts administrator. Currently, she's the executive director of the Locust Street Art, a small art center in Buffalo's Fruit Belt neighborhood. Locust Street Art offers free art classes to everyone who wants to learn art, and is based on the belief that art is a vital part of our humanity, and everyone deserves free access to this art. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Dorothea Bramer.
That person sounded interesting. Okay, hi everyone. I'm seeing some familiar faces here. So I have the great honor to introduce Lynne Sachs today. I met her last summer when I took a workshop in essay filmmaking at Union Docs, which is it's a documentary center in Brooklyn, New York, and it's a great place. I really highly recommend it to check it out, and also the workshop was extremely inspiring and really, really great. So that's how I connected with Lynne. As a teacher and a filmmaker, a poet, and installation artist, Lynne just exudes creativity. Her films are thoughtful but also playful. They interweave momentous historical events with very personal perceptions and memories, constantly expanding the form of what we know as documentary film. Lynne has made over 25 films, both feature-length as well as short form, and it seems like she is at all times working on a new project. Her work has shown at Sundance Film Festival, New York Film Festival, Images, and many, many other places nationally and internationally. Lynne has received support from the Rockefeller and Jerome Foundations and the New York State Council on the Arts, and residencies in both film and poetry from the MacDowell Colony. In 2014, she received a Guggenheim Fellowship. Lynne currently teaches documentary at Princeton. She holds an MFA in film from the San Francisco Art Institute, an MA in cinema from San Francisco State University, and a BA in history from Brown University. She discovered her love of filmmaking while living in San Francisco and working with artists like Bruce Conner, Barbara Hammer, Greg Baldwin, or Trinity Minha. In a recent interview that I read, the poet Paulo Javier, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, described her as a prolific director and tireless experimentalist, whose astonishing body of work also includes short films, videos, cine-essays, and literary adaptations. In the same interview, he says, "Your films, which are often hybrid, leave me with a palpable sense of play and surprise." And I loved that, the way he said that, and that's how I feel about her films. In Letter to Lynne Sachs, the documentary scholar Bill Nichols observes about her films, "You give a density and a delicacy to the representation of what happened that really enlivens memory and enriches history." This is about her film, Investigation of a Flame, which deals with the destruction of Vietnam draft records, but I feel like the statement really applies to many of her other works as well. In his book about essay films, the film scholar Tim Corridon wrote about States of Unbelonging, which is another really amazing film that Lynne made about the murder of an Israeli filmmaker, Revital Ohayon. "I believe it is an act of will and mind to overcome the paralysis and distance of world events. It is precisely the numbness before the geographic farness of media events that Sachs engages and chooses to physically and mentally overcome." That quote, too, captures something essential that Lynne does in many of her works. Through an act of will and mind, overcoming the paralysis and distance of world events. In Lynne's films, truth is not something to be discovered or captured and brought back as a trophy. As I've read, Lynne aptly described the more traditional approach to documentary filmmaking, but something to be worked out in a process that is much more deep and complicated and intimate and rigorous. And that's why we are also very lucky to have her. On that note, I would like to welcome Lynne Sachs.
So I'm going to talk over here, but you can hear me, right? On the back row. So Salma told me that many of you are filmmakers, or that you're about to be filmmakers, or you're thinking about it. So I'm going to talk to you about that, because I think that we all go through various phases in our lives, and we decide that we realize that we've been obsessed with something just when it's over. So I wanted to say that there was about a 15-year period in my life when I was obsessed with the impact that war might, necessarily people who lived through the conflict that you might have if you had grown up in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam, or in Vietnam, but how we reckon often as Americans, how we perceive war. So I made a film in Vietnam I called Which Way is East. I made a film that Dorothea mentioned called States of Unbelonging, which is about the Israel-Palestine conflict, but it was always from a very personal, or not necessarily my experience, from a place of intimacy, trying to understand, again, how world events seep into the consciousness of someone who is both, whose life is disrupted, or someone who's observing from far away. So I called that, after I'd been doing that for about 15 years and made a bunch of films, I called the film, I called it By What I Was Not, and I said I'm not a war photographer. I wasn't someone who was working for what you call a bona fide news agency. And in fact, when I made Investigation of a Flame, which I made with Daniel and Philip Berrigan and 7 other Catholic anti-war activists who, 15 years ago, next month, committed an act of civil disobedience by walking into a Catonsville, that's a suburb of Baltimore, draft office, non-violently taking out a whole file cabinet of draft files and burning them with homemade napalm. And they all went to jail for it. And I was very interested in people, in some ways I saw it as an art action, a performance piece, but it was something that they had to reckon with for the rest of their lives. So that was all part of my trying to understand war. I think it's because, well, I grew up in the 60s. I didn't grow up, but I was a child in the 60s. And so Vietnam was swirling around, but my recollection of it was watching it on the couch, hanging with my head upside down, and kind of listening to the numbers of people who had died. And it was a blur. And you probably many of you might have that about the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a blur, but yet it left a mark on you. And you now are trying to kind of figure that out. So I also made a film called The Last Happy Day, which was about a very distant relative of mine who had seen the worst of World War II. He was actually a doctor who was hired to put bodies back together before they were sent back to the United States. Essentially, he did cosmetic surgery for corpses. And that's the kind of thing that has to happen in any war. When the body goes back and the family receives it, how does that happen? But you don't think about that. But anyway, that was another way that I was perceiving war from a distance. So then I did that for a while, and then I said, wait a minute, I should learn how to make films in my own, like, the proverbial backyard, my own town. When I made Investigation of a Flame, I kind of called it my backyard film because I had little children and I was able to do some of the interviews in the Baltimore area, but then I had to travel all over the country. And I said, we shouldn't look at documentary film as this pursuit of the exotic. That's wrong. Because then you're always taking your body and your consciousness away from what you know, and you're sort of committed to educating yourself, and then what happens? I found you make a film in Vietnam and you spend a month there, and because you made a film there, everybody thinks you're an authority. But you're not. And that's actually why I'm very interested in the essay film, because the essay film says, I'm not an authority, I'm just trying to find out the way you are. You're my audience. So I want to connect with the audience in that sense that I'm not embarrassed to show my own naivete, or that I was wrong about something. That's another thing. In documentary, people are, oh, I made a mistake. I had this obstacle. I have to get around it. But my belief is usually the obstacle that holds you up from finishing an edit for a year is probably the most interesting part. And so you just have to kind of work your way through. But my problem was, I said, I don't want to pay for plane tickets anymore, and I don't want this idea that I have to go away to be curious. So, and to try to understand the world. Part of making documentaries or reality-based films, and not even believing in like that you are presenting reality, part of it is following the line of your curiosity and bringing passion and compassion with it. So, in around 2011, I made a film. I started working on a film which I called Your Day Is My Night, and it was essentially a film that I knew that I could make the whole thing in New York City, and I made it with a group of people who live in shift-bed apartments in Chinatown, and we made it over a couple of years, mostly Chinese from Fujian province, some older Chinese immigrants to the United States who spoke Cantonese, and we made this film together. I say we because I did this kind of shift over and I started to think about this kind of work as a collaboration. That I started to like resist the idea of subject, but I started to think about anybody in front of the camera, anybody behind the camera, you're all kind of working in this creative mode to make something. And so that film project became a series of live performances that we performed in community centers and shelters, in stages all around New York City. But it was also a film. And I kind of got call it the bug for making projects that begin with the camera, then end up in activating a certain kind of space, then coming back into, in this case, we edit on computers, then going out. And so that the process, it wasn't always about getting the finished piece, but that it was always evolving and becoming both live and recorded. And so that's something that really fed my imagination and something that became important also in the film you're going to see today, which is called The Washing Society. And one other thing I wanted to say about it, because I don't want to give anything away about what you're going to see, is that all of you live in Buffalo, and it's a very urban environment. And one thing that happens in the city is that in the city you have multiple cultures, multiple nations, and multiple neighborhoods, and I hate the word subculture, so throw that out, okay? But it's like it's a lot like a film. A film, we talk about parallel time, and that's the same thing that happens in the city. All of you are living a different Buffalo. So this is a way of my seeing aspects, and with my co-director, Lizzie Lesberg, who comes from a theater background, seeing something about our city of New York City. You live in another part of New York, but New York City. Seeing it from multiple perspectives through one kind of experience. That's all I'll say. So enjoy the Washing Society, ask me lots of questions, and we'll come back in 44 minutes.
I've taken laundry like so many, earning $4 to $8 a month for more hours than I can count. I've increased my earnings as of late without my children and adding on 7 new clients. Now, like you, I've taken the loads on Monday mornings, returned the clean goods on Saturdays. Our soap we made from starch, lye, and wheat bran, and our wash tubs we make from beer barrels cut in half. We carry our water right from the well, pump and hydrate down the road, boiling and rinsing and hanging in our own home. We press using a few hot irons at a time, and weather permitting, we work outside too, in the shade.
We enter another laundry together.
Probably our 50th this year.
I record everything in my notebook.
I tried to record with my camera. Sometimes they told us to stop.
Other times, no one notices.
We were interested in the history of laundromats, but our film became more about the people who worked there.
Calling attention to something that isn't paid attention to. Hidden labor. Ghosts are everywhere.
I needed just a job that I could be flexible with all the time. My friend was like, come, we have an opening. And I was like, okay, I can do it. I do laundry all the time. I have kids. I got used to it, and I've been doing it now for almost 4 years, 5 years.
好似咁樣就差唔多去洗25分鐘 ，please take 25 minutes to wash。
Well, I'm using my hands as soon as I get into work. I'm putting laundry into the washer. I'm using my hands to put the quarters. And then when it's finished, I have to stand there and fold however pounds. It could be as little as 1 pound to 100 pounds. And it may take me 15 minutes or it may take me an hour and a half. So I'm doing the same motion over and over again. When we're finished and we're stacked up and we have our bags, we have to lift those bags, we're lifting 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds. So now I have like a herniated disc, which I didn't have before working here.
12块路马。Okay, thank you. 記住啦。Okay。我喺呢度做咧，差唔多應該都做咗成都有成16年㗎啦。就同埋喺呢度已經睇到呢度呢個區都已經變咗好多㗎啦。以前呢度本身就初喺呢度喺呢個布隆街呢條街咧就好靜，好靜咁樣。就而家就一路就變咗好多啦，啲唐人啦，即係我哋啲中國人好多都開始就污走晒去㗎啦。而家就好多都係啲其他啲族裔嗰啲人就喺呢度做，變咗就有好有唔好嘅，即係好而家就好似呢啲 job off 就變咗，即係變咗好多咯，就。多咗好多啲代洗啊、drop off 啊，咁啊以前就通常佢都係你自己嚟洗嘅啫，就同埋呢個地區就啲租都其他啲生活開支啊，樣樣都貴咗好多喺呢度就，我就因為我呢度山七close 7 o'clock 㗎嘛，咁佢哋會走嚟喺度等埋我一齊先至翻屋企咁樣咯。我哋每日都係朝頭早都係7點到會出門口咁樣，朝頭早上7點出門口，通常都係做到7點幾、7點鬆啲、7點半到啦，喺度走就翻到屋企都成8點幾㗎啦，晚上8點幾，咁樣就日日都係咁嘅如是㗎啦，所以就早出晚歸咁樣咯。至於呢度有冇啲好有趣嘅嘢？
I found cell phones, I found money, you find drugs, you find needles, you find razors, wallets, licenses, IDs. You never know what you're gonna find.
All you get is their name and their bag of dirty stuff. You write it on a tag for all that sweat, coffee, period stains, and whatever. It's like getting to open up someone else's closet, seeing what's inside. You can tell someone's story just by what they've worn, how it's dirty, you know?
have people that treat you like human beings, and you have people that treat you like, just because you work in a laundromat, you're just, I don't know, lesser than them, or whatever the case may be, whatever they feel. And, you know, you get a lot of racism, I feel racism, and not only because I'm a Latina, but just because I am working in the laundromat. So they'll just come and they'll throw stuff at you, or, you know, they'll be like, here, I want this done, and that's it. Like, and not even a hello, not even a good morning. Their tone of voice is very negative, and it's just, you know, that particular person that day, I was like, good morning, how are you? And, you know, he was just very nasty to me. He was very nasty, and he didn't want to deal with me because I was, I guess, Spanish. You know, there was a lot of people in the laundromat, and him using the words that he decided to use, and the things that he decided to say they weren't called for, because all I was doing was my job, asking him his phone number, asking him what he wanted. If he wanted separation, no separation, and he just didn't want to deal with me at all. He called me a couple of names, and I was just like, you know what, I'm not dealing with you. My boss comes, he can deal with you. I'm not doing your clothes. And he said that I was going to get fired, that I didn't have any papers, and I was like, okay, whatever. Yeah, he was like, you don't have no papers, that's why you're working here, and I'm like, unbelievable.
I don't want to talk about it. Why are you asking?
There's nothing to say.
Why?
There's nothing to say about it. It's just a job.
It,
It's just the same. It's the same. I mean, it's just
why
a
do you
job.
want? Why do you want to know? It's not interesting. It's the weather.
It's just a job. It's just es lo mismo de otra vez. Es un trabajo.
Oo. Ayoko. Wala akong masasabi.
Es lo mismo de otra vez. Es un trabajo y el jefe. El jefe.
Tama. Yeah.
Yeah, like no, like the boss.
No sé, no
It's not
sé.
here. It's not. It's
No
not
sé,
right.
it's not okay. No.
Es un trabajito
Ay, hindi pwede. Ito nga, totoo.
Yo tengo un.
Anong gusto? It's coming. It's coming.
Mira, I have to go work. I'm
That's not
sorry.
our boss.
I have to go work.
Wait. Sorry, I'm sorry. Sorry.
How long you gonna be?
Less stress.
Okay. Please.
In the birthday, yes, we will be yes, we will be finished by then. Okay. 30 more minutes. Sorry. Okay. See? Sabi ko sa iyo eh.
Who you talking to like that?
No,
Who are you talking to?
See? No, sir.
Shut the fuck up.
You see?
Yeah.
Boss says no.
No cámara, por favor.
好難講，壞主意，
No grabaciones.
唔好搞我。如果佢哋見到你，
Te pueden
可
atrapar.
能會捉住你。
Si te ven.
如果佢哋見到你，
Dejé a mi familia allá atrás.
我要離家出走，
No tuve alternativa.
因為冇工做。
Porque era peligroso.
我哋捱
Teníamos
餓，
hambre.
時時捱餓。
A veces. Hubo una época que teníamos de sobra. Papaya, parcha, tamarindo. Ni siquiera sé cómo se llama. Ni siquiera sé cómo se dice quenepa. Recuerdo el sabor, pero no sé cómo se llama.
冇幾耐又唔夠食，
Cuando me marché, ellos eran muy pequeños. Cuando al fin llegaron, eran mucho mayores. Cuando vinieron lloré.
而家好彩有工做，
La paga no es muy buena, no es suficiente. ¿Salario mínimo? ¿Eso es una broma? Usualmente no pienso en eso. Ya no.
Ahora viven conmigo, mis hijos. Han crecido acá y ahora son muy distintos a mí. Y de la forma que crecí, son míos, pero muy distintos a mí. No, cámara, por favor. No hay nada que decir.
I started working in a laundromat when I turned 15. I'm 60 now, so that's 45 years. And I work only part-time, 5 or 6 days a week, 6 to 7 hours a shift. And each day, I do about 10 to 15 loads of laundry. So that's 70 loads per week, 280 a month, 3,360 a year.
On a normal day, on a normal 9-hour day, I do myself, I'm not saying they're all heavy, but I do no less than 25 to 26 bags a day. I think that I fold over 1,000 pieces of clothes a day. And you know, just little articles, socks, you know, underwear. All of them have to be turned inside out one by one. Every piece counts.
So that's about 72 loads a week, including the store loads. And my oldest child is 41 now, so that would be 3,744 loads a year. Is that possible?
If I had to say, I would fold 1,000 pieces a day or more. A week, it would probably be, I'm working 4 times a week at this moment, so it'll be like 4,000 pieces a week. So in a month, it would be over 12,000 pieces. And that's just what I think. I could be more. I know it can't be less. I know it's more.
July 1881. 20 African American laundresses meet to form the Washing Society. They demand respect and control over their work. They go door to door asking other laundresses across the city to join their strike. In 3 weeks, the Washing Society grows from 20 to 3,000 strikers.
I'm rolling. And I'm rolling. You can clap anytime you're ready.
Okay, so like I told you before, that I'm working on this film project / theater project, and it's centered around laundromat workers. Okay, so I came to you because I remember you telling me that you worked in a laundromat before. Can you tell me about that?
You can go ahead.
Yes, I worked in the laundromat I started in 1968. And I was doing different types of work in the laundry. On the first floor, it was they washed the things, and then they sent them up to the second floor, and they would hang them. They would shake them and hang them, put them on a hanger, and put them on the thing where they dry, and they come out on the floor. And that's where different girls, but you know, we had different people doing different things. But at the end, we were the last one. The girl, they called root setters. We were the last one to get them. On the Monday was light, Tuesday was heavy, Wednesday was light, Thursday was very heavy, and Friday was heavy. But it was very exciting, even though the pay wasn't too good.
Can I ask what the pay was?
I think I started off like $5 something an hour, and when I retired, it was $7.50 an hour. So, but I managed to survive. I learned how to live on my salary.
My mother brought me here when I was 10 years old.
I decided to leave.
She had no choice.
I came here because there was no work.
It used to be that we had plenty of quenepas and carambola.
I came here, there was no work.
Poma rosa.
There was just not enough.
Mango. I don't even know how you say mamey in English. I can taste it, but can't say it.
Stay there for a few moments, but can you speak the script and without music? If you just do it as best you remember.
This is my home, but also it isn't.
If something happens,
if they decide to look for
if
you,
you're stopped for something else,
if they have to look into your background,
your
your
status,
you pray everything will be okay. I don't need
I
anyone
sometimes play
to
games
help me with
myself.
that. I can do
pretend
that.
These clothes
but
are
on my own. I pray when I'm working, lying in bed, riding the subway. It's a way to pass the time.
Sí, él es dueño de muchos lugares. Siempre viene a ver, verifica el dinero, la máquina, hace llamadas, tú sabes. A veces viene su esposa. Ella también lo está velando todo. Yo no digo nada. Me lo reservo para mí. Nos dejan quietas la mayoría del tiempo. Mientras hagamos nuestro trabajo, nos dejan quietas. Documentary? No cámara, por favor. No grabe. Yo estoy aquí, pero esto no es mío. ¿Usted está grabando?
I think the union mostly worked with the bosses because every time the representative will come there, you know, come there to see about one problem, he always go away, you know, he have a little meeting with us and say, you know, tell us, you know, we're supposed to do this, we're supposed to do that. So, and we, different one, every time they switch up with the representative, they don't stay there long, they don't represent us too long.
Right. Didn't feel like.
So one day we went on strike because he had owed us so much money. We went on strike one Friday until we got our back pay. So it was, we had got bomb threats and things, you know, like that. Yeah, we had a picket line outside, and I forgot who covered it. Some news people were there. The second boss, he would peek it out the window. They called, let the other boss know, and he came in and they made the checks out. They gave everybody what they owed us because we had went before the union.
We, the members of the washing society, are determined to stand to our pledge and make extra charges for washing. We have agreed and are willing to pay $25 or $50 for licensing as a protection so we can control the washing for the city. And we can afford to pay these licenses and will do so before we will be defeated. Then we'll have full control over the city's washing at our own prices, just as the city has control over our husbands' work at their own prices. Do not forget this. We hope to hear from your council Tuesday morning. We mean business this week, or no washing. Respectfully yours, the Washing Society, 486 members.
Things change. My neighborhood laundromat, where I used to wash my clothes, isn't there anymore. It's been replaced by a cafe and a clothing shop. Most of the city laundromats where we shot this film have also disappeared. Atlanta Superwash, New Lucky Laundromat, Super Suds, the 2nd Avenue Laundrette.
Now there is an app with a woman's name, not a she, but an it. A laundry service on your phone that picks up your clothes at 10 p.m. in a truck that moves through the streets, across a bridge, to a catacomb of machines that run all night. And in this way, there are still 2 hands, or 4, or 6, or even 20, probably more, washing your skirt, your shirt, your socks, almost touching you, almost connecting with your skin, another layer. You'll never see those hands or the person they belong to. It's guaranteed. With the sunrise, your clothes return to you, minus the lint left in the dryer, washed and folded.
sit on the floor or on the stage and leave your computers behind and just come and let's reconfigure like this structure and the way that like so many films that you've been watching, re-examine a certain form. Let's break apart this lecture hall, change it. So if you'll just come forward. You're lucky enough, you're right here. You have the privileged seat. Thank you.
Oh, first two rows can stay where they're at, three. First two. Don't be that.
Come sit on the stage. I'm going to sit on the stage. You're not on display if you're sitting on the stage. Oh. All right. There's more room on this. There's a lot of seats on those front rows too. Okay, so I know we're going to talk about this film, but I have a question to ask you first. So, if you were going to shoot a film in film world, we call it location. In a location where you were going to make a documentary, would you close it down so you could have more control of the sound and of the environment and who was going to walk in, or would you leave it open? And let's not even call it a documentary because, as you could see, we did a lot of narrative, kind of more traditional, actual narrative performance, character development. So what I'm asking you is, would you want a space that was hermetic, tightly sealed like a good movie set is supposed to be, or would you want a space that was porous so that you didn't know who was going to walk in and say, hey, stop shooting. You know, you didn't pay us money to do this and you need to close down, or we need to run this business here. So what would you want? Yeah.
Porous.
Porous, why?
I kind of like the unexpected. Like, I used to write for The Spectrum, and it was really interesting when you were to interview someone and you were expecting them to say a certain thing and they said something completely different. Like, it just, I don't know, made it better. So, like, if someone interesting were to come in that you weren't expecting, it makes, like, the film so much better.
That's like why for example, I don't like PowerPoint, because PowerPoint is hermetic. If you watch someone give a PowerPoint address, they already know where they're going. They already know what's going to happen at the end. But if they do something that's kind of more vulnerable, then you're with it. You're like an audience, and it's theater, and you think, oh, they're going to really mess up, or you know what? That person repeated themselves. But that's the way the mind works. So it has a kind of, authenticity, let's say. What about somebody else? Yeah.
So these spaces are quasi-public spaces, right? Part of the environment is necessarily that public element. And there's an ambiance that comes from the public interaction with that space. And if you close it down, then you're modifying the truth of the space, right? Just listen to your credits. The soundscape in your credits is caused by human interaction with the space, whether it's the din of conversation, whether it's the clinking of the coins going into the machines. So I think the only way to actually capture that space is to leave it open.
Yeah. Well, and let me hear. Yes, you.
I was going to say it depends really on what you're trying to do, on the project you're working on. For example, the film you ended up making, which you showed us, everything hermetically sealed, wouldn't work. It wouldn't be the same. You wouldn't get the same atmosphere, you wouldn't be able to have the same conversations with people. You wouldn't be able to show the audience what's really going on in the laundromat, what's happening while you were there filming. It would just be you talking with some people inside the place. You wouldn't hear any noise or anything. It would be very sterile. It would be in a way empty. It wouldn't feel realistic or believable, but at the same time, the other way, if you're trying to do a different type of project where you want things to be more sealed because you may need less noise. You may need a different type of atmosphere. The project may go another way, and that may work fine. but in this case, it worked.
And
better.
these were kind of things that that we had to grapple with. For example, we wanted people to be dancing on top of the machines, and we had kind of choreographed it. Even the word choreography implies control. And when you have people coming in who own it, or people who coming in who are trying to get their laundry done, and this is the only day of the entire week that they have off. And they're really angry because this is their local laundromat, and you're putting on a performance, and you are definitely an outsider. And so that's a reason, I'll tell you, that you say, I'm going to spend some money and pay to have this place closed down. But then your whole budget is, whatever, $20,000, and the owner of the laundromat says, I make $5,000 every day. Sure. And if you can only close it down if you pay me $5,000. So then we're thinking, is it worth it? We're making a film about a laundromat, and we have a script. And if we don't close it down and turn off those fans, nobody will be able to hear the script. So, when have you had those questions too? Like, you wrote a script, and you're in production, and you have your production assistants and your camera person and your sound person. We had to pay all of the money. And by the way, through the last few films that I've made, I pay everybody. So I pay the laundry workers, and I pay my crew, and that's like actually anathema. Usually there's the rule of documentary. You don't pay your subjects, because then you're paying them to say what you want. But I also feel like I'm paying them for their time. So, and it makes them, it all becomes more professional in that way. So it's a give and take. Because I think my idealistic self says porous, but my practical self says, well, if we could only have it open from at least 6 to 9 empty, and those are the kind of things that in this reality-based, whatever you want to call it, nonfiction filmmaking. It's so funny when we say nonfiction filmmaking, it means we're defining ourselves by what we're not. So like the fiction stuff is up there. It's all better because for whatever reason it is, and then we're nonfiction filmmakers, and I always found that sort of like saying, well, I'm an atheist. So an atheist is defined by not believing in God. But can't you be something besides what you're not? But so this film is kind of, it's neither here nor there. It's both. It's a little of both. It's those things. So I wanted to start with that question because I think you're probably all grappling with that too. Like how, essentially, it's like your personal life too. How much control do I really need? Or can I let it all go and see what happens? Do you have other questions about the making of this? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to comment on the question that we'd already brought up. I think that what he said about you're altering the space by closing it off. I think that even if you did leave it porous, just the presence of the camera kind of fundamentally alters the situation itself, which you can see, unless you completely hid it, which would be difficult, especially when you have the crew working. You can see it when the people would acknowledge the presence of the camera by waving or even just looking at it. So I think it's kind of impossible to capture it in its purest form.
The camera is another character, and the camera is a member of the crew, and the camera is on a tripod, or the camera is on someone's arm, and the camera is either held by a man or by a woman, and the camera is either held by a white person or a black person or a brown person, and all of that is usually ignored. Or usually not acknowledged in the film. How is it the way, for example, you say the camera is always a presence. It always creates something that is charged, I think is what you're saying. And the other thing is that because of the camera, we have to train everybody. And the training starts with don't look at the camera. And that's acting. So actually, everything you saw in this film is acting. Because they all knew there was a camera there, and they all knew we were making a movie.
Acting or like an affected reality is very
An affected reality. But when you say to someone, could you fold that again? Like you did before? That's acting. because you're acting, you're performing yourself. And that actually is very interesting to me. We do it at birthday parties with our video. We all perform ourselves. Like, we perform ourselves happy because there's a camera, or we perform ourselves powerful, or we perform ourselves well-dressed. I actually think wardrobe, I always call it wardrobe, no matter what, because it's all a construction, so it actually makes people happy to think they're wearing wardrobe, because it sounds very movie-ish. And so, but I learned a lot from Godard. You know, you said Jean-Luc Godard, or did you quote Godard?
No.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Godard. But the French filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard is one of those people who broke down the boundaries between fiction and nonfiction and said to try, you know, asked us to re-examine what truth is, and they used to say 24 frames per second, but now it's can be 29.97 or whatever it is. It's truth and at that rate. Other questions? Yeah.
I have to confess that when I first saw it, because I saw your other films as well, and they're more like essay films. This one I think is more narrative. And then at one point I actually freaked out because I thought it was like pure documentary. And then I found out that, oh, it's also like experimental, and these people are actually acting. Why I freak out is because I actually myself exploring that kind of hybrid of documentary and narrative in it. And I actually experiment my subject being angry at me because she felt like she was not represented as she wanted me to represent herself in the film. So
and you let that be in your film. Right. That's really great. Well, I was talking to Sama a little bit about my introduction, so I told you about my past work, but the word I didn't want to use was hybrid.
Right.
Because if I said hybrid to you, like the hybrid car, or maybe you've never seen a hybrid film, but you know that's a code for this is going to be a little mix-up. You know, things are not going to be what they appear to be.
What would you call it?
Well, I would call it hybrid,
All right.
but I didn't want to use that term first because I think what allows for a reflection on, let's say, just the reflection on representation of human beings in front of the camera, what allows you to enter it and like have suspension of disbelief as you would in a narrative and then to become more skeptical is, your own naivete about this film. So it's like giving away the mystery, and also it would be, the film is a lot about clothes and about your skin, your epidermis, this epidermis of the film. I wanted the casing of the film to be intact before we started, and then for it to fall apart. So, but I'm glad it fell apart in a relevant way for you. Yeah. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
When you talk about permissions and the owner who probably a dick anyway, demands 5,000, almost like a mafia type. But anyway, like how long did it take?
We didn't work in that particular laundry.
Yeah.
Because he'd already worked with big time commercials.
Right.
And the commercials want to get everything done really fast, and budget is no issue.
Right. Yeah.
So,
but how long? But were the permissions given on the same day, like with a week in advance, or like how was this like?
Interesting.
How is the cast?
So you're a filmmaker, right?
Laundromats, businesses are not considered necessarily public spaces or like private spaces in which you, if the owner decides, yeah, it's cool, then go ahead. If he decides, no, pay me, and you can go ahead. And if you do it without permission, and you have, that might be the best chance for the porous environment in order to really to get honesty from who the people are there. You'll call the cops, because they're enforcing private spaces, and versus public spaces, which at this point are being gobbled up and, patrolled by the cops. So I was just wondering, how long did it take you to get the permission to make this film, which at the beginning you got the impression that you did not have permission?
So I really love the word permission. And I
Yeah,
actually think the word permission starts much, much earlier than getting permission to go to certain buildings.
Yeah.
The first permission is more interior, it's yourself.
Yeah.
Like asking yourself, giving yourself permission to actually break down a lot of walls that exist in our lives. For example, really talking to someone who doesn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
So really working to try to talk, like coming with a translator. You go to laundromats, people speak, a lot of people speak Chinese, at least in New York City. So you can kind of work and say, try to understand me. You know, I'm really just asking you about how long you worked here. Is it hard? Or you can bring a translator and listen to their story. And all of that says, I give myself permission to work against the grain of what I normally do, which is to walk into this laundromat run by Chinese people who know a few words like how to, like this book, the laundry and the quarters, and I'm gonna like really try to communicate. So that's the first thing, which I think is very exciting about this kind of filmmaking, that you move outside of your comfort zone. That's like, you know, that's like a trite thing to say, that's your comfort zone. But that's, I actually think, one of the most amazing things about this kind of work is not that, oh, I have enough money to fly to Iceland. I'm going to make a film about Iceland, or you know, you can make a film about climate change, for example, and you can make it on an island in the middle of the Pacific, and we can all say, I'm really sad, and I am, I'm not saying this cynically, I'm really, really sad that that island is going to disappear soon. But you can also make a film about climate change right where you live, and that's different kind of permission. So the question so that's just some of the first permissions. But the other permission, I've done both. Like all the scenes with the lint, where we kind of do this kind of puppet show with lint. I didn't have permission to do that. We brought our own lint. It's free. We saved it. By the way, lint is not just, it's mostly your hair. It's mostly elements of your own body, your family's body. It has some cloth, some cloth, but I've studied lint now. I have jars of it. But I like, and so that's another thing, like giving yourself permission to touch something that you consider dirty.
Yeah, or something that you think that you don't, someone else hasn't given you permission to do so.
It's trash.
Yeah.
Like saying, that's a big part of this kind of filmmaking is like eliminating those judgments. But the permission to actually go into the biggest issue is liability in the buildings. That people are I'm just being practical.
Yeah.
You're taking people, you have cameras, sometimes you're plugging into the walls. I don't take lights in these kind of places, so I have to look for places. I have to look for buildings that have a lot of natural light. I would never, especially in those buildings, ever, where there's water and there's a lot of plugs behind every machine, and I don't want cables. So that's, because one of the places where we shot, we said most of them were torn down. I'm not saying all the laundries are torn down, but New York City is a victim of condos and privatization of everything, as you said. So one of the buildings, like a few months later, a ledge fell off the building onto the sidewalk. We had finished shooting, but I was very glad we were out of that building. So that's probably my biggest concern. I actually, through New York, when we were shooting the sort of more narrative sections, and I actually had a crew, and we had a crew, and we had actors and things. We actually got permission. We paid for certain hours, and we had liability insurance. And I don't always do that, but I'm working with a bunch of people in a precarious situation. It's not actually that expensive to get that insurance through New York State for just a couple of days. It's just peace of mind on that one. So that's,
because the film looks great. It's just that if you were in order, again, to like have the proper equipment to give it that look versus the fact that everyone has, or almost everyone has a smartphone they can whip out at any point. People do millions of times a day, and make it from like that kind of quality.
Yeah.
But there's like a huge difference with how you're on stage and conceive it, and how you're going to go about getting people's trust to allow themselves to be the performers.
Yeah.
Without thinking that, oh yeah, this person's actually collecting visual evidence, against me, possibly for reasons.
Well,
of
that's one of the reasons the film changed, because people, our society is such that people are very, very, very nervous about being documented. Especially the people who are undocumented are even more nervous about it. And that's one of the reasons this evolved into a more, let's call it flexible than a film in which we could do writing. So we would do interviews. I probably talked to 50 laundry workers and just took notes on paper. And then Lizzie, who comes out of theater, Lizzie and I wrote a script, and that's what became a live performance for 2 years. And then we decided to make a film. So this has taken all, so they weren't all the same people in the film. We had a very prominent customer. His name's Tony Torn. He was at the very end. You saw him with a T-shirt on his head. Yeah, he was. So we would do live performances in laundromats, and he would be the wacky customer that would walk in and say all these lines, and most people did not realize that he was an actor. And and then so some of the documentary-ish, like there's Mr. Ho, there's Lula Holloway, and there's Margarita Lopez. So some of that footage was in the live performance. Lula Bell was in it because it's her granddaughter who's also in the film. And that's one of the things that's a porous thing. So Jasmine Holloway was, we went to see her perform in a Soho rep. We thought she was wonderful. We asked her to be in our film, and live performance, when we first started live performance. And we were working with her for over 6 months, and then she said, I was telling my grandmother that I was working in a performance about laundry workers, and she told me that she used to work in a laundromat from 1968 to 1999. I didn't know that. So she ended up turning into a documentary maker because we said, oh please, will you talk to your grandmother? We want to know more. And then first she talked to her, and then she texted me all the answers. And I said, oh, please ask her if we can come over. And finally she allowed us to. And actually I'll say that the first screening of the film ever was at University of Virginia at a conference on Black feminist history. And we were invited with Jasmine, and it was really profound to see Jasmine there talking to an audience like the size of this room about her grandmother's work and her union work and her strike. And she didn't know any of that until we started making the film. So she, in a sense, became like a producer with us. And that's most of you probably, the first film you want to make, maybe is about someone in your family, or you thought about it. Someone you don't know, or someone you do know, or you want to know more about that person. And so that's, I think that's not a bad place to start. You might not know as much as you think you do. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that scene with the owner off screen and what was happening and what that's a reenactment or if that?
That scene, which at first we just threw it out because it was we were actually doing a scene, we were performing a scene from our script, and then a man walks in and he wanted to do his laundry. And to tell you the truth, then one of the actors, Ching, she decided to call him the boss. That was just her idea because there's a lot of improvisation that goes on here. So then in a sense, it created this worker boss thing, and we were always witnessing. There really was a boss in that laundry, and he sort of was a bit like that, but he wasn't the one. So, And then, you know, in production, like the camera had stopped because there was this charged scene where this man wanted to do his laundry, and the camera stopped, but the recorder kept going. And so we just kind of liked the part where it goes to black, which is something that we do a lot in more experimental films, like just go to black and let it happen. But all of those, there's jump cuts there, there's things that show the, shall I say, the construction of it, but it also is kind of, it makes people uncomfortable because it's one of those scenes where what you're doing is against the rules, like a kid. Like, we're making a movie, we're the kids, and then the adults come in, like Cat in the Hat, and say, stop, you know, you need to stop. And there's a, you know, there's both aggressiveness and playfulness at the same time. And I think there's also an aggressiveness because there's a tone of voice from the man off screen that's resentful that we're there. And those are also, most of the time, the things you take out. And even going back to, like, I hate to say it, but the mid-90s, and I made a film in Vietnam, and there's a point where someone goes like this, and then an adult, and then another adult says like this in the same shot, and people would ask me, why did you keep this part where the person went like that? I later talked to them, and they said it was okay, but I still have that stop thing, and but that's part of filmmaking. And as long as you're not doing where someone says absolutely, positively take it out, I think that those aggressions are part of the story. Did you want to ask me? That's kind of the story. Yeah.
It's interesting because
yes.
You said that a lot of your laundromats that you visited were run by Chinese people. But in your story, a lot of the characters...
Not run, but the workers.
The workers.
Yeah, only one was owned by a Chinese person, and that's Mr. Ho. Actually, I saw him yesterday. That's why he felt comfortable letting us shoot, because it is his store. For the most part, it was the workers. I didn't see owners all that much.
All right, so the workers are mostly Chinese. Yeah, so the workers, they're not just Chinese though. The ones you chose to highlight were Latinx, African American. So I'm interested, because those demographics are typically the ones that are most affected by gentrification or the privatization of public spaces. My question is, was that intersectionality intentional, or was it just something that was sort of accidental?
So when I said that, it depended which neighborhood we were in. For example, there's a neighborhood called Sunset Park, and it's mostly Chinese. But then if we were on the Lower East Side, most of the workers were Latinx, women, not Latina, but, and so I would say that currently, in New York, we didn't see that many African American laundry workers, because most of the laundry workers were new immigrants. So the historical section goes to a point in time that Tara Hunter, in her book, which we quote, I mean, in a sense it's a quoting, it was a time post-Civil War in which, and prior to the Jim Crow oppression, when 3,000 African American women could organize. You know, there was this moment of kind of liberation, let's call it, very brief, 1881, 20 years after the Civil War, and we wanted to like bring up some of that history as a kind of legacy for the American, for the American story going back and going forward. So we definitely wanted the intersectionality between men and women, Because sometimes people say, oh, this is a women's, like, domestic work is women's work. That is not the case if you are new to this country. You might be you don't have access to the same kinds of jobs that someone who's more established or someone with citizenship might have. So it was important to us to say it's not just women's work, for example, to that intersection. Yes?
Yes, I was wondering, and when you start a project, how do you know if or when something where you might merge script with a performance, or documentary with a script, or any other combination you may end up doing? I mean, how do you know when that combination might occur? Is it something that happens over time? Is it an epiphany? We go, well, if we did this, or if we add this with this, we may get something different. I mean, how do you come up with that?
Well, it's not like I've been working in this hybrid way for a very long time. The first film that I've always called myself an experimental filmmaker. So, how do you define an experimental filmmaker? What is an experimental filmmaker?
Filmmaker who is willing to experiment with different styles.
So different styles. What is an experimental filmmaker? Like, yeah?
Challenging traditional ways of seeing and hearing.
Challenging traditional ways of
storytelling.
seeing. Right, and also challenging your own expectations of what you can do or what you want to do. Anybody else, like what is it? I mean, at University of Buffalo, there's really, really profound tradition of experimentation. Here, with so many incredible experimental filmmakers working here. But most people, when you say experimental filmmaker, actually think of a certain canon of experimentation that even stopped in the 1970s, as if like at Anthology Film Archives, they call it essential cinema. It's experimental film, and it's a body of work that's very closed. But I think as long as you continue to experiment, then those experimentations break down the genre or break down these divisions. And I was always open to that. Like, I probably don't know how to make a 58-minute CBS or PBS documentary. I actually don't know how. You might think, well, she knows how, but she's breaking all the rules, and so she chooses not to, but I actually don't even know if I have the skills to do it. So I'm always experimenting, and the longest film I made in 2013, which was called Your Day Is My Night, one of the reasons it became a performance is because I was editing the film for a year, and it was actually a bit more narrative. And I showed it to two people I really respected, and they both said to me it was a disaster, and that I needed to free myself from whatever I was doing with this material because it wasn't working. And actually my husband said to me, get it out in the world at least once. So I got all the people back together. That's another good thing about working with people who live in your town. I got all the people together, and we went and we kind of performed it again, what we've been filming in a men's shelter in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and all of a sudden I got the bug. Like, I just got the sort of thrill of doing a live performance. So that was more of an accident than my decision that it was going to be hybrid. Yeah. Yes.
Hi. So I can see that there's like a lot of really good intention behind the work that you do, and a lot of like interesting stories that aren't usually told come out of it. How do people usually respond or react to to someone who's like a white person, who usually white people are the causers of gentrification or in the neighborhoods that these people live in or work in? coming in and then requesting like information from them.
Right. So that's one of the most fundamental questions of all in any kind of work where you're asking people to tell them use something that's private and something that's their own, and what are you giving back? Maybe you're giving money, or I'm giving money, or maybe you're giving them the chance to work on something with each other. I mean, I've been wondering that for a long time. My very first, let's say, it was my graduate thesis, was I finished in 1989. And I went back to the town where I grew up, which is Memphis, Tennessee, and I made a film about an African-American filmmaker who was also a minister. And I walked around with my, you'll all know what a Bolex camera, the 16 millimeter, some of you use Bolexes? A little bit? It's a 16 millimeter camera. I walked around to black churches and just talked to people about this man who'd been dead for quite a long time. And I asked myself those questions then, and I'm still asking. And I try to think of ways to make the work collaborative. I think that the performance side and taking it to sites and not just extracting the material is, you know, there's so much about any kind of art making where you're taking. How can you have a give and take? I try. There's a point where I was making that film, where a teacher of mine, Trenti Minha, the Vietnamese filmmaker who made a lot of films in West Africa, with so she was an outsider. She was a Vietnamese woman in an African community. We're always asking ourselves, wait, are we shooting from the inside out or from the outside in? And even that word, it's such a messed up thing that the camera says shoot and the gun says shoot. And are they both doing something that's destructive? But I don't know, what's your answer? What do you think is a good
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think like a lot of times, like I'm from Bed-Stuy, so then, but I moved out of Bed-Stuy because of like rising living costs in Bed-Stuy. And when I go back to Bed-Stuy, like the attitude now is that a lot of like white artists move into Bed-Stuy and then kind of appropriate the culture of Bed-Stuy to their own advantage sometimes. And then they're living in that neighborhood now, and the people that they're telling the stories about are now living elsewhere in Brooklyn because of their decision to now work in Bed-Stuy or whatever. So like coming from that experience, looking at it, it can sometimes feel like the stories are being used, and then like it's not really coming back to the community because those people that used to live there aren't really like what's coming out of the story that's being told about them.
That question is something that haunts me all the time. I wanted to tell you about a book that you might love that it's called Making Rent in Bed-Stuy. And have you read it? By Brandon Harris. It just came out like a year and a half ago, but it's actually about some of those issues. And he is a filmmaker, and he's actually African American, but he's from Cincinnati, I think it is. So he feels like an outsider, and for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of, he asks himself a lot of class questions about being there. He lives there, but he's trying to make a movie there. It's fantastic. So people have, like you were asking about intersectionality, and like, when do you feel like an outsider, when do you feel like an insider, and why are you taking? I mean, there's some, like, the very, very, very first videotape I ever shot was around, sort of around a Hindu temple, and somebody said, well, in Hindu culture, if you shoot an image, I don't know if this is correct, but someone told me that it's like taking someone's spirit. And I worry about it. So I appreciate your asking it, and I don't have a set answer. I don't want to stop making films, but I'm really seriously trying to think of ways to make myself vulnerable while I'm making it so that I can learn from the people and they can teach me things and we can work on things together. And that's another reason why that travel part is awkward to me. And that convention is supercharged. Yeah. Yes. Oh, well, actually, there was a question on the front row. And then
I'll be quick. As somebody who's lived abroad in a non-Western culture for an extended period of time, I'm really, I've felt what it's like to be an outsider. And when you're living in these cultural bubbles, these ethnic sub-communities, whether you're a quote-unquote expat, whatever that means, or whether you're an immigrant, it's hard to mix. It's almost like oil and water, right? Then you slide off of the skin of the culture that you're living in, and the sinew between those two spaces tends to be language. And I'm really interested in this question of cultural permeability, like where those things meet. For you, going into these spaces that are typically dominated by different languages, or at least in doing this research for this project, it seems like you really made an effort to. My question is, was it language that opened up, was it having a translator that opened up the people that you spoke to, or was it something else?
I'm extremely interested in language, and I can't stand subtitles, especially even the word subtitle, because the minute you have subtitles, you stop listening. And I do it too. You watch an Italian movie, or you watch a Japanese or a Chinese movie, and once you have the subtitles, you don't listen to the cadence. You're not really listening to how people are with each other. You're just trying to follow a plot, in a sense, or watch how bodies move on the screen. So, actually, I wanted something to happen in this movie so that this is a little bit has to do with what you said here, like how could the formal issues in the film suggest that we as viewers are outsiders. That's why there's actually a pretty long section that's not translated, where we played around with a weave of Chinese and Spanish together. So if anybody in this room speak Chinese and understand those sections, maybe somebody, you don't have to raise your hand, but some people, yeah. Oh, where was that? Oh, yeah. So when you were watching, I'm sorry, when there was a section without subtitles that was in Chinese, how did you feel?
A sense of familiarity, because I personally speak Cantonese, so I understand.
Oh, yeah. So it wasn't even Mandarin, right? Yeah. There was
I speak Mandarin too.
Oh, too. But I mean, the Cantonese is. I figured, the Cantonese is kind of like more homely. It maybe sounds like your grandparents, or I don't know, something like that. That there's as you said, a familiarity to it, and the same with Spanish. And I remember years ago, a friend of mine. I grew up in Memphis. A friend from Memphis came to visit me. I lived in San Francisco. And she was so intimidated because she had never, ever in her whole life been anywhere where they were speaking a language that was not English or American. And so she, walking around the Mission District of San Francisco, was terrified. It was a sound issue. It was a problem for her. And that really affected me, and I've thought about it for years. So you said you lived outside for some period of time. You lived outside of your own, like the comfort zone of being in the United States. And most people don't have that opportunity to live out unless it's forced. Like if you're a refugee or you move for some other reason, and then you are an outsider. But I think it's interesting in the world of a film where you create that distance between access of information and and disorientation. Like there's a word in French that I've never found the right word in English, which is dépaysé, like the sense of being confused or the sense of being outside your own country. Literally country, you know? And I think that if you can have that happen, especially if you're talking about multiple cultures, for the audience, an activated experience for the audience is really, because often in documentary kind of work, people finish it by thinking, wow, that was so great, because now I feel I really understand that culture. I really felt like you took me inside and I had access to something I never would have seen before. But, and then that adds like a level of, as they say, privilege. So I just wanted to play with that a little bit. Did you have a question, Sandra?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, actually. How often in your projects during the production time do you go back and rewrite your shot list and script? And on the other hand, in post-production, second question, when do you decide that that's it? The film is done. We were talking earlier about how odd it is to make a 40-minute film, which we both did. So why do you decide that this film is 36 and that film is 45?
So it's interesting you asked about the shot list, because I don't always have a shot list, like I just have to go with the moment, and often don't. But in this film, in the more narrative-ish sections, I had drawings for everything. So even the part with the lint, I drew that. I knew how the hands would work. It kind of ruins the spontaneity, doesn't it? But you know, I knew how the buildings were. I knew that time was not was an issue. So so I knew I did that. But the thing is that in a film like this, you shoot, you edit, you shoot, you edit. I don't have pre-production, post-production, production and post-production. So when things are disasters, you just go back and shoot some more. Or by yourself, you know, you just go with one friend and you shoot and you get something that you couldn't get with the crew because you just are kind of quiet. This was a very hard film to edit. But the thing is, every film I make is like the hardest thing I've ever done. So I thought this was super hard because we were trying to find the rhythm of it and how to convey repetition without redundancy and how to develop sense of the characters. Like when I said Lula, you know who Lula is, or Marguerite. For example, why do you have lower third IDs, which is a convention of documentary. That was just a little code to say, oh, the lower third identification is for the real people. So, but you wouldn't pick that up right away, but that was a code. So trying to find all these different codes was challenging. Yes?
So what you were saying earlier about trying to tell stories, that you guys are talking about that you maybe culturally may not be, you have to sort of throw yourself into. Do you ever want to tell a story, but you feel like you shouldn't or you can't because of your background?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll say, the film I made, States of Unbelonging, I made in Israel, Palestine, and that was complicated. I'm a Jewish person, but I have a profound critique of Israel, but yet the film was about a woman who died, an Israeli woman who died in a terrorist act, and I made the film because I was interested, I just read about it in the New York Times. I was flipping through it and it said, oh, a woman filmmaker who had 2 children. I'm a woman filmmaker who was like, there, but for the grace of God go I want to know more about her. And so I started to work on the film, but the thing was, it became complicated around Zionist issues, and am I making this film as a critique of Palestinians? No. So I wanted to bring in those issues, And then when I told people about it, they thought it was a very pro-Israeli film, but then when they saw it, they thought it was a very anti-Israeli film. So all these things happened at the same time, which ended up, I'm neither Palestinian or Israeli, so I'm actually completely separate. And so what that I happen to have the same religion as she did. Neither of us were religious, so I'm kind of an insider, kind of an outsider, and in fact, I didn't even want, it was sort of an essay film documentary, but I didn't even want to go to Israel because I felt like if I went to Israel, that was a concession. So it's not this film, but it has a lot to do with who am I, why do I do it, what is the agenda of the film, what will the effect be, those kind of things. And I tried to lay bare, I mean, I guess that's what distinguishes an essay film, in that you lay bare those questions. Like, should I be making it? Am I are we you're an outsider here because you're college educated. And then you go to a place where the people aren't college educated, you're an outsider. There's a lot of different ways that you, even of your own family, or like I have a qualm right now. I have a sister who is schizophrenic. I'm going to see her in June. I'm very interested in some stories about her, but I'm just looking at her because she's different. Like, is that an invasion of her space and her? So I ask those questions all the time.
Let's do one more question or comment, and then I'll announce a prize, a treat from Lynne that she's sharing with this class. No one wants to ask anymore. They're like, what's the prize?
Yeah, right.
Lynne is doing a graduate film production workshop, an essay film production workshop for grads, and the first 4 to 5 people to email me are welcome to join if you're interested. We're doing it in 278 upstairs CFA from 11 to 2, and we'll be filming with cell phones and screening students' work at the end and doing discussions and critiques about that. So she'll be teaching the class tomorrow. If people would like to join, we have limited seats available. Oh, right now.
Well, don't even say seats, because we might not be sitting that much.
That was a joke, basically. But we have room for 4 to 5 more people to join us, so you're welcome to shoot me an email. And I apologize that we can't take the whole class, we'd love to, but we have room for a few more. So email me now. She also has a fantastic screening tomorrow night at Hall Walls, and you have a link right now in your emails about the event and about the films that will be screening. People who are taking my class tomorrow night, sorry, you can't.
Yeah, please come tomorrow. If you haven't been to Hall Walls, it's got a great history in Buffalo, for just like a center for alternative art making of every kind. The first time I went to Hall Walls, which was in the 90s, I did an installation where I wanted to have dirt from different parts of Buffalo all over. So I came 2 days early to create these sort of beds of dirt, and the curator had to drive, I didn't have a car, and the curator had to drive me all over Buffalo looking for different kinds of dirt. So you never know what's going to happen at Hall Walls. That is not what's going to happen tomorrow, but that is something that I did there. So if you have any questions you want to ask me just one-on-one, I'll be here for a little while. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I don't know if you want to hang around. If you don't, no big deal.